Ladies and gentlemen, guys and girls, welcome back to the Age of Warfare podcast. I almost slipped up there. I hope everyone's doing really good. I hope that everyone's doing well. I am Anxious Maximus. That is the Gate Aiden Cornia. And today we got a pretty interesting topic for you guys. And that is populism. And I'm sure that's a topic you guys might be aware of. That's been coming up more and more often. Not that we've had some populist leaders out there. So I hope everyone's doing well. But as always, before we get started, Aiden, how are you doing, my friend?
Doing well. I've had a pretty nice day today. It's a fairly decent weather out here, but it's quite a bit this morning when it was still a bit cloudy, so it wasn't too hot this morning as well. And then got home just as it started heating up, so I can enjoy the weather with a fan, which is how you should enjoy hot weather. So apart from that, I'm doing pretty well.
That's what's up, man. Doing good, man. Just been busy with some book releases that are coming up. So that and got some personal stuff that I'm dealing with. I mean, nothing too crazy, but we had to deal with that. Appointments for the pops. Book releases, book cover releases, ordering paperbacks for people who want it, all the normal stuff that our author goes through, and making sure we have time to do this wonderful, fun podcast that we're doing. And it's going to be a fun one, that's for sure. That's going to be for sure. So anyway, so before we get started on the actual meat and potatoes, what is populism anyway, Aiden? Care to explain what the actual concept is?
So the concept of populism, it's a political term, really, and it refers to people who rely on their policies and their platform is for to gain popularity, to be elected or to gain support for whatever it is they want to do. So rather than you might have someone turn around and look at it in the cold light of day and go, well, actually, people aren't going to be happy about a tax rise, but the country will run a lot better if we just do a little bit of a tax rise. Not a particularly popular thing. People never like taxes. Whereas a populist would go the other route. So, for example, one of the ones in Rome would be to hand the grain dole, to increase the grain dole for the people in Rome, and that was very popular. It's like more free food. People love free things, so that you rely on that to gain your support to be able to do what you want to do politically, and to gain power. It's not in early days. It wasn't necessarily all about being elected to be leader or running in a specific election for something. While it did have that aspect to it, often it was to gain support for an idea. Right. Often by like your patrician class and the senatorial class. While they did hold political positions, it was as we've talked about before with the way that Rome worked, and people sort of like following specific leaders. It's gathering people to your cause, as it were. So, for example, Julius Caesar is a great example of that.
Yes.
He treated his troops well, he paid them well, and he made sure they were led well and didn't treat them badly. And then he gained the popular support of his troops. Now, that was for political means in the end, but initially it wasn't political means. It was so that he could do what he wanted to do because he had that popular support. So, as I said, it doesn't necessarily have to be directly political. Sometimes it is just gaining support for something. You'll see it in the modern day with companies where they have an advertising campaign talking about how they're giving money to charities.
Right, exactly.
That then boosts their presence. People like the company more. People are more likely to buy their products, and then they can do more things that they want to do with that.
That's a good point. It's a good point, Aiden. Populism doesn't have to be limited to just politics, by the way. It could be populist movements in entertainment. People trying to give into the will of the people. Even actors and entertainers have been known to be populist, trying to change what they is, getting away from traditional media and trying to do their own thing, given to what the people actually want. Hoping to hit it big. So it's not just a political term, but yes, it is. It has become a very popular political term, as you can see in this graphic here. Populism is one way, and democracy goes the other way. We've seen this in the United States, of course. We even see it in the United Kingdom to a degree as well.
It's one of the things that comes up quite often in the UK political scene, that you'll get populist leaders who they'll say that they want to do things to gain support, to gain the votes, to gain the seats. They might not necessarily do the things, but they'll look at what people are annoyed about, and then they'll say that they're going to do those things. But then you might get other parties who look at the area and go, oh, well, people are grumbling about, say, the bin collection isn't frequent enough. There's not enough recycling facilities. The beachfront in our town is always dirty. And then they'll come up with ideas and try and rally support around, well, what if we employ a couple of people to clean up the beach every day? And that kind of idea. So it doesn't necessarily have to be. Often these days, populism is linked to a lot of right-wing movements, because there's a few more these days, a few more right-wing political populists than there are left-wing ones. But there are still left-wing populists at the same time.
I think the biggest name in populism is this guy, Javier Milei, which is the president of Argentina.
Yeah, so it could be, and this is the other thing, populism isn't necessarily good or bad as well. Populism is just, it is a thing.
It's a thing, right?
Democracy has its good points and bad points, but it's just a thing. It's a way of describing how people are doing a certain thing. It can be used for good, it can be used for bad, it can be used for many purposes. But it isn't in itself a bad thing.
Right, I mean, right now, because right now, look, I know it's going to go into history, I promise we will, but this kind of sets it up nicely, because Argentina had a poverty rate of 54%. I'm not sure how familiar you are with Argentina, but I was doing a little research on Argentina, because it's a beautiful country, Aiden, that you think would be doing much better, but and now it has a poverty rate of 38%. So I mean, it's still a high percentage, but from 54 to 38, this guy's kind of did some pretty good things.
It's making strides in that way, yeah.
And his most popular catchphrase, I'm sure you've heard it, afuera, afuera, out, afuera, trying to cut the Argentina deficit, trying to cut the budget.
Yeah, I think I have come across this a little bit. Obviously, I don't get much South American news where I am, but I think I have come across a couple of these bits in the end of the political area type of thing.
No, me neither. But I've dug into it, man. It's a really good video too. I gotta show you later when we're done. But But anyway, right now he seems to be the biggest name in populism. Besides the president of El Salvador is another populist too. The president of El Salvador, who has really done a good job cutting down the crime and also cutting down gang violence. And I know because my mother is from there, so I kind of keep tabs on news out there.
Yeah.
So, but like you said, it has its good and it has its bad. But anyway, I don't want to get too dug into the modern stuff. Let's get into the good stuff. Let's get into the ancient stuff where it actually started. And in case you don't know what this is, this looks like it's Pericles. I'm sure you've heard of Pericles.
Oh yeah, Pericles. He was most definitely a popularist. He was. So it's ancient Athens. There, he was a general in the war with Sparta in the Peloponnesian War, and because Athens was a democracy, democracies lend themselves to populism, because you have to gain support to be able to do things in a democracy. Because you gain the support of the demos.
Yes,
we're talking about ancient Greece, the demos, to be able to do things as well. And he was well known for, he was a great orator, and he would stand up and give great speeches as well for support for the war, to make Athens great. And it was because it was a real, the Peloponnesian War was a real life or death struggle. There was points where Athens was about to be destroyed and points where Sparta was about to be destroyed throughout the war.
Yeah.
As well. So having people in those situations, those dire situations, having someone who can stand up there and rally support is quite important for those situations. But also, this populism because he's saying things that are popular for the people. And one of the things that comes along with this is you have to say often populists will say things against the current ruling political class because it often grows a discontentment with the current way that, say, a war is going or that a government is doing something, and the people are frustrated, and then a person will speak out saying we can do things differently, and then starts rallying people around that. So it's these types of situations that he found himself in that created this environment where he could then lean on the populism to be able to achieve his goals.
Right. And because he was the dynamic in ancient Greece. There was a certain dynamic because, Spartan was the more traditional warrior class, they were the Spartans. They dealt things militarily, while Athens was actually was the democratic, giving speeches was actually a certain skill in Athens. And you had a lot of popular philosophers from Athens. If you know all the philosophers are from Athens, you don't really have philosophers. You don't really have philosophers from Sparta.
Yes, it's quite interesting, really, isn't it, that you get this one place where you get pretty much all the philosophers as well. And there are a few others, like when you go up to Thebes, you can find some more. But Thebes and Athens were actually quite closely linked throughout a lot of history as well.
But that's why some people. That's why if you really dig into history, populism really got started in Athens. It was the actual focal point of actually, because they say Athens was the founder of the modern day democracy. Was Athens.
So one of the interesting things that I should probably go into here is just a quick rundown
of
basic Greek political thought. So the way that the Greeks saw how a city-state should be ruled would be either it's autocracy, oligarchy, or democracy. Autocracy, auto, singular, one person in charge. Oligarchy, a group of people in charge. They don't have to be the wealthiest, but they had to be a distinctness about them to make oligarchy. They had to be the most powerful in some way in that society. And then you had democracy, where it was ruled by the citizens. Now, unlike a modern democracy, we're talking Athenian democracy. So not everyone was a citizen. There were slaves, there were people who weren't citizens, and then there were citizens as well. It was a smaller group of people. Think more the early stages of democracy where you had a lot of disenfranchised people, like before women were given the vote, before the vote was extended to people of all colours. That type of thing. So we're talking those sort of early stages where it was like the landowning gentry got a vote, but a little bit more spread. However, it's still a democracy because the demos those are the people. They're the citizens. It's the citizenry. It's just we've extended the citizen franchise out, but it's still the same thing. Now, each of those, they said, had the good points and the bad points. So when you talk about an autocracy, if you have a good leader in an autocracy, like when we're looking at the Byzantines, Justinian, fantastic. He did loads of really good stuff, and he was really good. But then you can end up with an emperor like Caracalla, for example, that Rome had, who wasn't particularly good. And we can think of a lot of bad emperors, and we can think of some good ones. So you have that problem. It's feast or famine. If you have a good one, everything goes really well. If you have a bad one, everything can fall apart very quickly because it's one person. Now, the oligarchy, its good point is you have a group of people with a vested interest because they might earn all the land or they might have all the money. So they're the people that can actually get things done in the city-state. But the bad part about it is they're doing that. They can be doing that for their own wealth. So think of companies that people don't like, some of the big companies. While they might do charity work, realistically, a lot of them, people view that as just a way to write off taxes so they can make more money. And that's seen as the bad aspect of that. And then you get something in democracy called the tyranny of the people. Now, tyranny of the people is where populism starts to get its bad name from. So you have the good part where it can be used for good. Now the bad part comes from this tyranny of the people side of things. The tyranny of the people is when you get a larger group of people together, the IQ level of the group drops because people will go along with the herd. And you get some outliers, obviously, but the majority of people will do that same thing. So people
Mm-hmm.
can get worked up and get angry about things. If you look at
Right.
any race riot around the world ever, is that thing where one group of people has been pointed out that they're bad because of this incident that happened, and then it spreads like wildfire. The story expands, and then people get into their heads that it's a bad thing and that we need to do something about it. And then sometimes laws come out of that to prevent that particular group of people doing things. Or you get obviously them race riots being the really bad end of the spectrum where everything goes to pot, really. So you have this as well, where populists can prevent that happening by saying certain things, or they can encourage those things to happen for their own ends. So having a divided people, it might be easier to rule over, divide and conquer type of thing. So this is what I was saying about there. The idea in itself isn't bad, but there's good and bad in every one of these systems. So the
Right.
groups saw it as that if you put all of those systems together, they would balance each other out. Hence why a lot of modern Western democracies have three parts. So we have a king, we have the House of Lords, and we have the House of Commons. That's
Yes.
our autarch, our oligarchs, and our democracy. And then in the US, you have the president, you have the Senate, and then you have the House of Representatives. That's your three parts of government that follow that model to try and balance each other out. Where things often go wrong is where the power slips too much in favor of one of those groups as well, which is obviously not for this episode, but that is one of the ways where populism can start messing things up a little bit.
Yes, not for that, but and another thing I was looking up about Athenian democracy was that any male citizen over the age of 20 could take part, and it was actually a duty to do so. You actually had to.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
There's certain countries where it's illegal not to vote. Is a thing. I can't remember which countries they are, but there's certain countries you have to vote. If you don't vote, it's a crime. I mean, it's not a throw in prison for the next 20 years type crime. It's a fine, unless you have a good excuse, like you couldn't get to a polling booth. But it's rare that that will happen.
But this was
in
an
Athens,
interesting
it
one.
was like that type of place where you were expected to take part.
Yes,
you had the franchise. You're expected to use it.
Yeah, I mean, in Athens, yeah, they took their politics very seriously in ancient Greece. That's for sure.
Oh, yeah,
that's for sure.
So.
But so you know, so some people say, so why did the Athenian democracy fall? To say, you know, it's kind of the question I was leaning towards.
So one of the schools of thought is this tyranny of the people, and it's when we look at it today, Athenian democracy to us looks more like an oligarchy. It's citizens, and to be a citizen, that you have to be a certain qualification. It was relatively easy, as it were, but they were the rich people. They were doing things for themselves. I think it was owning land was a big one. It was a big one in Rome as well. That if you owned land, that gave you a voice, because it was an agrarian society. If you owned land, you had a vested interest in the city-state at the time. The problem came when, and this is one of the other things about democracy, it's one of the pluses of having an autarch, and why the Romans had the dictator rule, where you put one person in charge so decisions can just be made when you get into a crisis point. The problem that the Athenians had is they didn't really have that. So when it got to a crisis point where you've got someone else who does have an autarch, they can't really do much against that, because they've then got to have these people come together to decide that. So in democracy, things often move slower. So it couldn't react as much. And so they concentrated a lot more on their philosophy. As it's, if you look at Hadrian spent a lot of time in Athens as well.
Right.
In his rule, and he was obsessed with these Greek political philosophers and ideas. So Athens remains important, even though it gets destroyed, which is why we still recognise it as a major place today of political thinkers. But it was that inability to react, as it were, that ended up putting them on the back foot.
No, Dungeon Dan, you're in time. You might have missed the beginning, but yeah, but you're just in time, Dungeon Dan. Yeah, we were talking about how populism kind of stems from Athens, from the city of Athens, and so you didn't miss too much, because now we're about to get into some of the juiciest stuff, the juiciest side of populism, and I'm sure you know where I'm going with this. Ancient Rome. We're going to go into ancient Rome, because I think that's where populism really showed big time, was ancient Rome. Because and now we're going to go back to one of my favorite games, Rome Total War, because when you play as one of the Roman factions, you have the Senate. You have to priest the Senate, but you also have to priest the people of Rome. All right, so
balancing act. Yeah.
So at first you want to priest the Senate so they can give you missions. So they give you missions, and when you complete them, like taking a settlement, blockading a port, they give you denarii units, or they give you more favor and then because the idea is to get your men into what you would call it, into Roman politics, to take on one of the Roman offices. And where they can gain extra traits. But then later in the game, you want to start becoming what we call populist. You want to start gaining the popularity of the people. And what do Roman people love? They love winners. So the more territory you get, the more people start to love you. But ironically, when people start to love you, the Roman people, the Senate starts to question your loyalty towards them. They start to worry that you might become too much of a populist, and you might want ancient Rome for yourself instead of being united with the Senate. So I mean, I think World Total War does a really good job showing off the populism, showing off that concept about do you want to be loyal to the Senate, or do you want them to be the next Caesar and become the ultimate populist?
Yeah, and this is one of the things it comes through as well. If you play, so Hearts of Iron has it a little bit, but Crusader Kings has it a lot, with the political dynamics that you can do lots of things, and you can invade lots of space. If you invade too many places too quickly, you start to lose the people at the top, sort of like the other rulers of their various places. Now they'll come and attack you. But you do have a certain element of you need to keep the people happy as well. Because if you keep taking troops and you keep losing battles and you keep losing troops, then you get rebellions in areas, and then you can end up with a popular rebellion against you as well. So you have to kind of keep it balanced with keeping these rulers happy by giving them lots of things, lots of power. But at the same time, you have to keep the people happy as well. So this is where the populism comes in, even if you're, say, in an autocracy, especially, that you get this whole populist idea coming through, because to a certain extent, all politics is about being popular. You have to be popular to be elected. We had a very famous after Margaret Thatcher, the Prime Minister after Margaret Thatcher. Very good. He was Margaret Thatcher's chancellor. So he's the guy in charge of all the money. He was very, very good, but he had no personality whatsoever. This is John Major that I'm talking about. And he was very good for the country, and he implemented a lot of things that would have really helped the country. Now, eventually scrapped because Tony Blair came along, and he was a populist leader. So people liked him because he was popular. Because what John Major lacked was being able to show people and say the popular things about what he was doing. But in Cold Like Day, when you look back on it, you realise that he was doing quite a lot of good for the country, but it was more in the background. So sometimes you need that popularism to be able to get things moving in the country, but it can be a double-edged sword as well, because then you can end up getting rid of policies that on the surface look a bit bad, but if you leave them alone for a little while, they can come in and make the country better. So it's a balancing dynamic, really.
Right. So Dungeon Dan asks a good question. In that game, I mean, if you're talking about Rome Total War, Dungeon Dan, yes. I mean, if you become too popular, the Senate might start giving missions to the other Roman factions, the other two Roman factions, and order them to have an assassin kill one of your generals. And they kill one of your generals, they get a bounty. Or the other way around, they can give you a mission. If one of the other Roman factions is getting too popular with the people, they could tell you, "Hey, we need your assassin, right, to kill to cancel one of the this particular general, this particular governor of the other Roman faction, take him out." So yeah.
So you have that, and with Crusader Kings as well. Yeah, if it's one of the things that constantly happens is like a jealous baron will decide to rebel and absolutely destroy your country. It's well known if you start the game as the Saxon kingdoms, you end up with the area around Cornwall. Is like if you don't do a nice balancing out with that, you'll get them sending assassins after you a lot as well if you don't keep them happy. And also they might foment rebellion because the people don't like you. They might make the people hate you more as well, which is quite interesting.
And yeah, and so, a good point, exactly. Now we're going to get into obviously what any ancient Rome buff should know. You had what we call the Populists against the Optimates, the political divide of the late Roman Republic. Yeah, this is what the Roman Civil War was all about.
Yeah, and this is so. This is the big thing where the back part of this is obviously, if we've talked about many times, the Romans ended up with an empire by accident when they defeated Carthage, and they didn't quite know how to handle it. So the Republic was really struggling of how to handle having an empire because it was no longer a city-state that worked quite well. With even when they had the Latin kingdoms and they took over the Latin tribes, even after that they were sort of doing okay. Had some rebellions like with the Samnite Wars, but when you have all of these other territories as well, you've got to balance this popular opinion across a whole range of places. And then in Rome itself, if the people of Rome don't like you, you're not going very far as well. So it's a massive balancing act. And they tried to sort it out. And you end up with these two schools of thought, which is where the Optimates and the Populares start coming into this of trying to sort of like go, oh, do we do it this way or do we do it that way? It ends up with some quite big clashes.
I mean, that's a good question, Dungeon Dan, if that game will be required training for future politicians. I mean, I maybe, but I mean, obviously, it's only a game. So, obviously, the games are not always going to get it right. They're not going to get everything correct. And it is a game for enjoyment. So obviously, some things in games, although they try to do well, it's going to be simplified for gaming purposes. It's not going to show you the actual background of everything. So maybe not. I mean, maybe, but I wouldn't see it.
So one of the interesting things in our country, there's a particular degree from Oxford that a lot of politicians do. It's called PPE. It's Politics, Philosophy and Economics. So it's supposed to be all parts of the government system. There's a weird thing where they don't write a dissertation. I could talk about that at another point. It's not really relevant here. But in that, the philosophy side of it covers a lot of the things that we're talking about now. So these ideas of balancing, those people, the philosophy of the Greek political thought and the systems of government is actually one of the things that a lot of our politicians in the country learned at university and had to study. So in a roundabout way, yes, because if they like that type of thing, they're likely to start playing those types of games as well.
So now let's get into what the obviously the Populists and the Optimates were. Obviously, the Populists, as you may have guessed, looking at the topic, sought to increase the power of the people while advocating primarily for the interests of the urban poor and the plebs, right? So basically, if you look at the UK, right, the UK part, they're like the Labour Party, if I'm correct, right?
Yeah, the Labour Party is supposed to be. Well, the politics got weird in the UK, but what the Labour Party is supposed to be is for Labour. They're traditionally backed by unions, so it's the people, what the people want. and trying to make things better for the average working person. So
And,
it fits that mold as well.
and in the United States, it would be the Democrat Party, even though, like I said, I want to keep my personal opinions out of it, but I will say I question that to a degree. I question that to a degree.
Yeah.
But anyway, getting away from that.
The whole Labour thing as well, yeah.
Yeah.
It's what they're supposed to be doing, essentially.
Yeah.
It's
all right, so,
isn't it?
yeah, so I'm just trying to break it down for the modern audience who might not necessarily understand these terminologies.
Yeah.
So the political agenda involved is to challenge the authority of the traditional elites of the Senate due to the opposition of the oligarchic rule of corrupt aristocrats. Basically, they didn't like the idea of aristocrats. You know, I'm sure all of us know what an aristocrat is. I'm sure all of us know what that is.
So one of the interesting things about this is, so the formation of left and right in modern politics comes from the French Revolution. And it's literally when they walked into the hall, those that supported the monarchy and the status quo sat on the right-hand side, and those who wanted to see a lot of change and more things for the people sat on the left-hand side. So you'll often find those populist ideas often entangled with left-wing political thought. Is quite easy to see them. However, as I've said before, it's not exclusively a left-right thing. Both sides can use populism as a thing, but this Roman bit that we're looking at here is where we see this dynamic coming in. It's more traditionalists and progressives is this sort of dynamic as well, but it's the way in which they did it that makes them popularists. So it's what their thought, not what their thought was, but how they did it that creates it.
We got a good question for Aiden here. Forgive my ignorance, Aiden, but you mentioned Rome had an empire before they knew how to deal with it. Was the empire Alexander the Great not documented enough to be a game plan for them? It's an honest question.
Not well. So it was studied, but the way that Alexander built his empire was very different to the way the Romans built their empire. So if you think of it in terms of Alexander went out to conquer an empire, had an idea of what he was doing. He would invade a country. He knew how he was setting up the politics in that country and how he was ruling it. And then he moved on and did that again and again until he created this empire. Once he was gone, this goes back to the whole autarch thing. It then divided up into wars, and you ended up with the different kingdoms.
And this is another major difference, Dungeon Dan. Alexander the Great, he marched east into Persia. He went into Bactria. He went to Afghanistan, which is seems like the death knell of all empires, Afghanistan. So maybe they saw him as a potential game plan, but they saw, wait a minute, he marched into Afghanistan to India and failed, and the empire collapsed. So maybe we don't want to do that. Maybe we want to stick to the West.
One of the things that goes along with this as well is time as a massive factor. So when Alexander was conquering, he conquered a country. Conquering a country takes time. And then once you conquer the country, you then take it over, and then you move on, you conquer the next country, and so on and so forth.
Right.
It wasn't that he suddenly conquered. So Rome was set up as a city-state. So everything that it was doing was set up as a city-state. You've got to remember that Macedonia wasn't a city-state. That was its difference. It was a country with a capital, like we would think now. It conquered Greece first as well. So it conquered city-states, and it had this idea of how to handle things before it went on. Whereas Rome was a city-state that had been warring with other city-states. And even in the early Republic, where you have the Samnite Wars and a populist war that turns up as well 2 or 3 times. With these other states, it was built around there are city-states. The problem they had is when they defeated Carthage, they got large tracts of land without city-states, but just cities. So it was set up more like a modern country, where it's not an individual city doing a thing that has land and then they're stuck together. It's that there is a city that's where the main thing happens, and then you have this area of land. So it was that shift to that. And when they defeated Carthage, they didn't think they were going to win for a lot of that war as well. They put all of their effort into trying to win, and then eventually did. But controlling all of that land became very difficult because their society wasn't set up like that. When we talk about Marius, which we will end up doing, you'll see how that idea changed with, so we talked about Marius's mules before, and that kind of idea. But let's start on this list as well, because the Gracchi brothers are really, really important to this story.
So like I was trying to explain the dungeon, Alexander the Great, he marched into Bactria, Afghanistan, So in other words, I think the problem with that was that he built his empire too quick, while the Romans decided to go with a more slower, more concentrated approach, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it was the initial bit where it went quickly. Alexander wanted it to go quickly and had a plan for that. The Romans didn't. The Romans had their plan, as you say, for it to go slowly, to take this bit and then that bit,
right,
and then hold this bit in,
and
suddenly they've got all of this land.
And it makes sense because if you play Rome Total War, the Alexander expansion pack, it captures that essence really good. That you only have 100 certain turns to conquer all of Persia. You have to move quick.
Yeah. There's no sitting around when you're doing
so,
stuff like
yeah.
that. Yeah.
But anyway, I don't want to get too off topic. So obviously let's go. Obviously there were five populists in Roman history. We start with Tiberius Gracchus, which was the late Republic's first populist. Born in 163 BC, Tiberius was one of the first significant populists who fought for populist reforms that canonized the conflict between the two parties, the optimists and the populists. His roots were both plebeian and patrician origin, which is a very important thing because in order to be a senate, you had to be a patrician. But things changed where plebs were announced to serve in the senate, plebs.
So one of the things that you get with this is the tribunes. So you have a tribune for each group. And the way that the voting in the political system of the Roman Republic worked, and then later Empire, was that people divided into tribes. The more money you had and the higher level of citizen you were, so obviously this is the patricians and the plebs being the two poor ones, their tribes were smaller. So each of their votes had more power. Think of it in the sense of in the modern world where they try and create a district that has the same number of people in, roughly. But if you go to a rural area, that district could have a lot less people in than an area in a city that has loads of people. So in fact, the vote that you have if you live in a very densely packed area can be a lot have less impact than one if you live in a sparsely populated area. And this is something that then became really an issue. And this is what I was saying about the empire side of things, because it's the enfranchisement of the people and how much power they had to do this. Because if you think about it, once Rome takes this land, your basic pleb in Rome is still better than your slave out in Spain or in North Africa that the Romans then control. They are a next level up, and they saw themselves as better as well. And they wanted that. And that's what the Gracchi brothers were tapping into, this idea of, well, yeah, we might be plebs, but we're Roman plebs. We're not plebs from this group or plebs from that group. We're not Samnites. We're Romans, which is a very big thing about the Roman identity as well, of that pride that goes through and how they thought they were better than other people as well, at a lot of points in history. Yeah, sorry, carry on.
No, that's okay. No, that's okay. Sometimes we need some context. But anyway, the big thing about Tiberius is that he proposed redistributing land from wealthy landowners to Roman citizens, which was almost unheard of in the early to mid Republic days.
Oh, the land reforms.
Yeah, land reforms. Involving this reform was a limitation on the quota of land that any individual could own in order to establish public land for redistribution to the poor. Obviously, the optimists were like, oh, no. And then Tiberius wanted to pass the reform for the popular assembly, bypassing the Senate, which was a radical violation of the traditional aspects of the Roman, constitution. And people thought that Tiberius was trying to be a tyrant. which
Yes.
which eventually
Well, it
leads to his
kind of was.
assassination.
Yeah. Basically, this list is a list of people that got assassinated as well.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things about this, the land reforms, were initially it was supposed to be that the land was divided out, so obviously the rich were going to get loads of it. But there was supposed to be a whole bunch of the lands that they had now gained was supposed to go into a pool for the poorer people. The plebs would go out and have this land. The senatorial class basically stole it all, which is where the impetus was for this land reform. That what the promises were at the beginning never happened, and the Optimates had taken this stuff as well, which is why the people were angry about this. It wasn't just that they wanted the land; it was that they were promised this land and it had been snapped up by the rich.
And by the way, in case Dungeon Dan asks how Tiberius died, he was crubbed to death. So there you go. That was his cause of death. He got crubbed. But now comes somebody that you brought up before, Gaius Marius, the Marian reforms.
2 seconds. Yeah, you missed the second one, which is
Gaius. Oh yes, I did. My bad.
Gracchus, Tiberius's brother.
His brother, right? Yeah.
He basically we can do it very briefly. He tried to do the same thing, similar outcome.
Basically, he have several reforms that are aiming to improve the rights of ordinary citizens. And one such reform, there was one such reform that suggested to extend Roman citizenship to all peoples of Italy, even Samarites.
Yeah, the idea of that is this is where we were talking about before with the idea of populism, where you're trying to gain the biggest group of people in support. And this had been a big thing through the conquering of the Latin kingdoms and with the Samnites as well. The Samnite wars were pretty brutal, so the Samnites were often seen as second-class citizens. Allowing them to become Romans then allowed them into the Senate, which gave them seats. So this is, for modern parlance, would be granting statehood to Puerto Rico, for example.
Right.
It's that kind of thing that he's proposing to happen, and it's the similar sort of effect upon the way that the country would run.
So, basically, Gaius, obviously, the elites feared that he was trying to overthrow the Senate and establish a monarchy, take it back to the Roman Kingdom days, the days of the Roman Kingdom. All right.
The Romans hate one thing. The Romans hate monarchs. They absolutely detest monarchs.
Right, and then so Gaius and his supporters were attacked by a mob of political opponents in the Roman Forum. So and then he attempted to flee the sea. He was eventually cornered at the Aventine Hill, and decided to cancel himself because he didn't want to be captured. But he canceled himself.
Yeah.
I'm sure you guys can know what cancel means. I don't have to go into detail about that. So there you go.
He went for a very short swim. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Yep. And now comes one of my favorite ones, got the Marian reforms, Gaius Marius. Obviously, he changed the way Roman armies were trained.
So we've done a whole episode on him before, but this is the reason I mentioned him before is, and this links into the how to deal with having an empire. And what Marius had realized is that they needed troops and they needed to keep expanding, but they didn't have enough troops because they were still built on a city-state model like Athens or Sparta, where it's only the citizens that fought, so they had to have land. The problem that you get with that is in an agrarian society, it's your citizens need to be there during harvest season. You find this all throughout the medieval period where they won't go to war over the harvest season because they've got to go back, and either you're in charge of the land and you're overseeing all of the grain being brought in, or you are going and bringing the grain in yourself. So what he wanted to do was separate the qualification of land to be in the army. He wanted to separate that out, which also then has the added effect of you've got a lot of angry plebs wandering around the streets, clubbing people to death and throwing people off rocks. So, great idea here. Why not get those angry people into the army, and then we can use them to be able to do what we want. With obvious consequences.
Yeah, obvious. Yeah. because there was a significant shortage of military manpower. So, because obviously before you had to be a Roman soldier, you had to buy your own equipment.
Yeah.
Which is
Yes.
ironically, when I wrote The Great Centurion, when I wrote that series, I captured that concept pretty well. That where the main character has to buy his own equipment. You know,
Yeah,
he
it's
couldn't.
really on in the first book as well that you start bringing that in.
Yeah, I mean, so if you want further reading, don't you then grab The Great Centurion? All 3 books are 99 cents, by the way. A little self plug right there. So between the years of 1313 to 101 BC, Rome faced another threat. The Celtic tribes were roaming into the territories. So breaking with tradition, the Roman constitution was ignored, and Marius was elected consul 5 years in a row and given the freedom to construct the army on his terms. So he said, hey, well, forget about tradition here. You can build your army. Just make sure these Celtic rats don't get into our territory.
So there's a huge context here. So we've often talked about the Romans having this system where they can elect a dictator. Marius is realistically the first time that's used, like it is, where they keep electing him consul, and he is kind of the dictator, and that's where that really comes from. Now, one of the interesting things about the Celts in this is the Romans are frightened of the Celts. They have an unholy fear of them because the Celts were the only peoples to reach Rome and destroy Rome. Even the Carthaginians hadn't managed it, but the Celts had. So they're frightened of them. So this is where the populism comes in, because the general thought of an average Roman was, oh my God, we can't have these Celts around, which allows you to garner support by going, look how scary that man over there is, as well, which is quite an interesting one.
So, apart from this military reform, Marius was a strong advocate for the needs and interests of the common people as white and soldiers, which was often neglected by elites. His political career was untraditional, and the personality cult in which he conducted politics was undoubtedly the epitome of the populist disclosure. And ironically, Marius didn't really get clubbed either. He actually kind of ended up living a pretty fulfilling life, Marius.
Yeah, it was surprising that he didn't get killed by one of the later populists. I'm sure might come up.
Now comes I gotta be honest, I'm never not familiar with this next one. The populist Publius Cornelius Pusher. Yeah, and they say he's one of the most controversial political figures. Though he was born into a fully partition family, his behavior and politics were anything but traditional. He was a known supporter of Julius Caesar and the populist faction. There you go. I mean, obviously, this guy's a fanboy of Julius Caesar, and his politics were involved in a colorful pampering of the people. One of his most popular acts was killing himself into adoption by a plebeian family in order to win as tribute of the plebs. Even though it's crazy.
This is a really, really interesting dynamic that this guy created. So the tribune of the plebs had to be a plebeian. The tribune, basically, the tribunes had to be of the class that they were the tribune of. And usually you try and get yourself adopted by a more important family. If you look at Octavian and Julius Caesar, Octavian obviously becoming Augustus later on, but he got adopted by him, and it was very common to be adopted. Your parents could still be alive, but you'd be adopted into a family. Now, because the way the laws worked, if you were adopted into the family, you became that class that family was.
Right.
And Tribune of the Plebs had an incredible amount of power, and there was a lot of veto powers that these tribunes had as well. So when the Gracchi were around as well, there was a lot of change in that political power. Tiberius, for example, was a big move, was trying to change a lot of how that worked and enhance this power of the tribunes. And the thing is, if you manage as your faction to control all of the tribunes, you can basically control all of the elections and you can do what you want. So using the system on a technicality, getting adopted by plebs means you can be tribune of the plebs, and therefore you control that seat without having to do any other weird things to go along, which means then you control all of the tribunate.
Now they call him the most scandalous one because Claudius' decision to he actually ended up dressing up as a woman and sneaking to the women-only religious festival of the Bona Day. How at the house of but that was absolutely nuts, and he was prosecuted for it, although he was acquitted, and he was a very charismatic guy. He got it around a large following. He used it's supposed as a mob to wreak havoc. Yeah, he was actually one that used the mob to wreak havoc in Rome instead of so they went around just burning stuff down and said, "Hey, go burn all the stuff you can burn."
Yeah, it's you get these characters when you look at populists in Roman history. You get these great characters that come out that go, "Cool, let's just go nuts and just mess with the system," and then they go off and do all this crazy stuff as well. You end up with these really, really funny stories. But one of the interesting things there is he doesn't get prosecuted. He doesn't get convicted. But that's partly all to do with him becoming a tribune and that control of the tribunate. And you're controlling enough stuff. So it's like the age-old sort of 1950s, my uncle's the local judge in the Midwest,
Yep,
therefore I can get away with anything. It's that kind of dynamic that he was able to fit himself into. So he was guilty as sin, but he managed to get off because he knew the right people.
For those people, right? For those people who say, "Oh, everything was better back then. Everything was better back then." Yeah, not really. It's always been corrupt. Even since the beginning of civilized, even during the classical age, everything was pretty corrupt. So, yeah, that it kind of brings a whole new new meaning to. It wasn't always better back then, and. To end things with Claudius, he was finally killed in 52 BC in a street fight between his followers and those of his enemy Titus Mino, and his death sparked an enormous outrage, and his body was carried to a pyre that burned the Senate house.
Yeah, it's like it wasn't just a little death. That guy, it was it just Rome burned. It's like that. If you're talking to people that burnt down Rome, realistically, you just need to look at the Romans, especially the late Republic. They're constantly burning the place down.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And if you ever play Caesar 3, the city builder, when you piss off the people, it kind of does a good job showing off what they do by burning your houses down, burning down your buildings. Yeah, so way to go on that particular game, showing off the that you can't piss off the people. The people have power as well. And but you know what's the date? I told you 52 BC, and you know what? That's a very important date because 52 BC kind of leads into the final populace of the late Roman Republic, Julius Caesar. Of course, nothing. This countdown couldn't be correct without the great one himself, Julius Caesar. Oh, hail Caesar! The infamous story of Julius Caesar. He was born in 100 BC, and Caesar was the nephew of Marius, the guy with the Marian reforms. Julius Caesar was his nephew. So
there's also one person that we haven't mentioned in here, mainly because he wasn't a populist, but you have Sulla. So Marius and Sulla have this great rivalry that goes on through, and Sulla's purges of the Roman aristocracy led to it's one of the reasons that Julius Caesar scarpered out of Rome at one point. So I'm pretty sure it was Julius Caesar was one of the people who had to flee because there were purge lists that Sulla used to put out of the people that weren't supporting him. And he used some populist methods. He used the whole mob thing as well. But you end up with this situation where people get forced into these parties because of these marriage ties as well. As you said, obviously, he's a nephew of Marius. And I'm pretty sure, isn't he nephew because there's of an adoption and a marriage? Like Roman marriage and adoption's weird. They're constantly divorcing as well. Like the divorce rate in ancient Rome was insanely high at one point. which is why Augustus reformed. He had a load of reforms to prevent it happening because people were just divorcing constantly, and he wanted a. It was. I can't remember the terms for it, but essentially he was trying to make Roman society a bit more like the pre-1950s style that people look at, white picket fence and traditionalist families. Whereas obviously before that, a lot of this had happened, hence why he was doing that. And you get this, the Julius Caesar, and he uses this, the popular support as well, leaning on the fact that he is related to Marius as well. So he's within that party by essentially birth. So he doesn't have much choice in the matter.
So obviously, everybody knows the story of Julius Caesar. He conquered Gaul, Britain, and parts of Germany. So he became this legendary Roman general that's untouchable, you could say. And in 49 BC, he defied the Roman Senate and crossed the Rubicon River with his army, sparking a civil war that lasted for years. And eventually, Julius Caesar won. He became dictator for life in 44 BC. So, yeah, so for people wondering, did he actually become consul? No, he actually became a dictator, Julius Caesar.
And the interesting thing about becoming dictator is, obviously, we said before, dictator was given for if there was trouble and you needed someone in charge to sort things out. Now, with all of this fighting and these mobs that we've been talking about that have been going on, that's how he ended up getting himself elected dictator for life, because the whole concept of it was that he needed to be in charge to sort out what was happening with the Roman Republic. Therefore, he needed to be dictator. And then as soon as you get control of the tribunate, especially the tribune of the plebs, you can then do this. So this long-running thing from the Gracchi all the way up to Julius Caesar is kind of building towards what Julius Caesar does. Without all of those populares before him, Julius Caesar would have just been a great general. It probably wouldn't have caused the collapse of the Roman Empire, Roman Republic with what he did. He would have just been that general.
Yep, but obviously he did more than that. He also implemented reforms that redistributed land to landless Roman citizens. The topic of land had been controversial since Tiberius' populist agenda. So obviously, the conservatives, the people of high society, said no. They didn't like the idea, and then he took it a step further by increasing unemployment with the lower classes. He started public works projects such as new roads and aqueducts and other infrastructure improvements, and he enacted policies that provide debt relief to Roman citizens struggling financially. So yeah, he did enough for the common people.
So one of the interesting things about what he did was that he followed through with these policies, and that's one of the big things that people then don't like populists for, is they say things to get this power and then don't do much with it. And you see that through some of these people. But Julius Caesar actually followed through. He said he was going to do it, and then he got the power, and then he did do the thing that he wanted to do. Obviously, we don't know how it would have ended because he met an untimely demise, as we all know. But it was that change, and it led to a change in how the Romans thought and how the rich classes thought as well. So when you look at, say, Pompey and Crassus and people like that, they realised that what they needed was the support of the people as well as the Senate, which is why what you do is you build these public works projects, which incidentally goes right the way back to the beginning of the episode, talking about Athens, because as a top citizen, you were expected to build public works projects for the people, and that's how you solidified yourself as a good citizen by doing that, using your money to help the people, and hence the popularism coming from that time period, because that was the popular works. And we see it again here with Julius Caesar doing exactly the same thing, because he would have obviously read all of the political thought, the speeches of Pericles and all of that in his youth, when he was obviously taught his history.
Yeah, so and then obviously everybody knows the story of Julius Caesar's death when Brutus turned on him and the Senate stabbed him 23 times. Everybody knows that story. You can actually read Julius Caesar by William Shakespeare. I mean, if you can understand the language, it's actually a really good drama, really excellent drama, as long as you can get for the English variation of Shakespeare. So, but then obviously Caesar's death started the war between Octavian and Augustus.
It was Mark Antony. So Octavian ends up becoming Augustus. At some point in all of this, but he ends up fighting Mark Antony, and this is a bit with the whole Cleopatra thing with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony.
Yeah, exactly.
Mark Antony. The Battle of Actium is where that all reaches a head, which is famous Roman coins as a ship on them to signify Augustus's victory at the Battle of Actium as well.
Yep, exactly, Dungeon Dan, exactly. Public Works is, yep, exactly, pretty much. Basically, he was the equivalent of, government housing. I'm sure the government housing in the UK and the government housing, yeah. So basically, he was the advocate for government housing. So the Insula for the government housing of the Roman world was Insula. Then the government housing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But ironically, after Caesar's death, when he became dictator, ironically, Augustus Caesar became the first emperor of the Roman Empire, and that's when eventually the fear that the Senate would lose their power eventually came true. They eventually did lose their power.
One of the really interesting things about the Senate losing their power and you getting Augustus realized that actually he needed the Senate on side, but he wanted to tackle this corruption that had caused all of these issues, because he realized if this carried on, he wouldn't be emperor for very long as well. So he's continuing these public works and trying to get the Senate on side. And this is what I was talking about with these social reforms that Augustus was bringing in, was he was trying to make the Senate better. I mean, it roundly failed, because Augustus's daughter was caught shagging a senator behind the podium in the Senate, and he had to exile her. And I think his mum was caught sleeping with half the senators and had to exile her as well. They both got the same name as well, ironically. But so you end up with this, but that, in the people's eyes, made him seem better, that he was treating himself as not above the law, doing the same thing to his family that he would do to other senators, and he would treat the people as well. And that settled it all down, which is then what leads to the empires. The way that Augustus reformed the Senate meant that people were, the plebs were a lot happier about who was on the Senate. Obviously, they're still not happy about the Senate. Like, you could have the nicest people in government, you still get people that hate the government because it's a government, and people tend to do that. But he managed to basically quell this rebelliousness and this populism, and sort of tamp it down. And then, as we were talking about, combine it with that of having enough populism that he's doing things that people like, but at the same time doing all the things behind the scenes to make the empire run properly as well, including getting a big army and going and invading people, because that's what the Romans do. Right. People don't like me. Quickly invade somewhere as well.
So that's pretty much populism in the Roman Republic. And Aiden, I gotta tell you, we are well over the hour, believe it or not.
We are, yeah.
Yeah. So we managed to cover pretty much the ancient era of populism, and I'm sure there are more samples. And you know what that means, Aiden? We're gonna have to do another episode. We're gonna continue this. We're gonna continue this episode. We're gonna continue this in two. So in a couple of weeks, guys, we're gonna continue populism, because while we talked about populism in the ancient world, there was also populism in medieval times.
Yes, yeah. So we've got to do the medieval bit, and also the populism in 1600s to 1700s is incredibly important for the modern world
Exactly.
as well, because that's where we get ours from.
So yeah, it all worked out. So as I told you before, we're gonna need 2 episodes, and here we go. We're gonna need 2 episodes. So And don't you, Dan? You're correct. Never enough time. You're right.
Never enough time.
Never enough time. But yeah, unfortunately, World Life is coming to haunt me, which means we're gonna have to end the episode right here, guys. But please join us in 2 more weeks, and we're gonna continue in the populism timeline as we tackle the medieval and the post-Renaissance era. I hope you guys come join us. As I said, we keep our personal opinions to ourselves. So you did a wonderful job. Thank you, Dungeon Dan, as always, for joining.
Thank you very much.
And so I am Tritonian Angelus Maximus, easy for me to say. That is Negate Aiden Cordier. We'll see you in a couple of weeks as we continue this journey down the populism form of government. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your weekend. And as always, take care.
Take care, guys.